Good morning. My name's Rebecca Fisher, and I am surprised, but also very happy, to be your worship associate this morning and to assist our visiting minister, Reverend Libby Smith. On behalf of the First Unitarian Church of Wilmington, I welcome those of you here today gathering in person, as well as those who are joining us online. First Unitarian Church is a welcoming congregation. So, come as you are this morning. Please feel welcome to arrive here or join us online as your whole self, with all your identities and ideas, your troubles, your triumphs, your full range of emotions, and your love. As Unitarian Universalists, we value and encourage the individual search for truth and meaning, while we work as a community to build a more compassionate, just world for all. I just realized I don't need to wear this up here. If you're new to First Unitarian, I welcome you to check out our website. It's firstuwilm.org. So just the word first, two U's, and the first syllable of Wilmington, firstuwilm.org. To learn more about us and sign up for our email newsletter so you won't miss out on anything. A gentle reminder on our current COVID protocol to please keep your masks on while in the building, unless you have a speaking role in the service. We're softly singing hymns behind our masks. And after the service, we will be gathering for conversation in the parish hall, but we're not yet back to the coffee service. And finally, a warm welcome to our speaker this morning, Reverend Libby Smith. She wrote a brief and very modest bio, which I will read. Reverend Libby Smith was ordained in 1992 and has served both as a parish minister and a chaplain. Now that she's retired from congregational work, her spouse describes her as minister without portfolio, but she sees her work as a part-time patchwork ministry of trying to say yes, mostly made up of guest preaching and rites of passage. She is honored to join us this morning. That's very kind of you to say. Thank you. And Reverend Libby, we're grateful you're here with us today. So now let us prepare our hearts and minds for worship.
Words from the Reverend Krista Tavis. Whether you have come here with heart full or heart empty, with spirits high or low, rested or tired, hopeful or despairing, whether you have come here out of habit, conviction, loneliness, or curiosity, you belong here because you are here. And all that you have and all that you are is welcome here. This morning, we are together the heartbeat of this congregation.
If you have a chalice at home, I invite you to join us by lighting it now while we read these words by Laura Thompson. Across the distance. Across the distance, the light from within me shines, sending love to all. Across the distance, your light is fuel that warms me and helps to keep my own light burning. Together, we keep the flame of community burning bright.
And we'll kindle 2 additional lights this morning. We learned this week that the father of our former minister, the Reverend Pam Watt, Edward K.W. Watt, passed away peacefully on Sunday, July 31st, and I understand some of you also knew him. Our deepest sympathy goes out to Reverend Pam and to her family. And also, I thank Rebecca for stepping into the worship associate role this morning. We had expected Jacqueline Karras to be serving, but her father died unexpectedly on Friday, so please be holding her and her family in your hearts as well. Thank you. And now I invite you to turn, if you have a hymnal, you may turn in it to 347. The words will also be on the screen. Gather the Spirit as we sing together.
Rebecca's doing double duty today as hymn leader and worship associates. Give her a minute.
Gather the Spirit, harvest the as one. Gather in peace, gather in thanks, gather in sympathy now and then. Gather in hope, compassion, and strength. Gather to celebrate once again.
Now, please join me in reciting our unison affirmation. The words are on the screen, or you may know it by now. First Unitarian Church of Wilmington is a beloved community that nourishes minds and spirit, fights injustice, and transforms the world through loving action.
And that makes me want to add an amen. May it be so. Beautiful words. Would you join me in a spirit of meditation and prayer? Gracious Spirit of life and love, into this community where we find strength and common purpose, we bring our joys, our sorrows, our hopes, and our dreams. We turn our minds and hearts toward one another in trust, giving love, seeking comfort, and celebrating together. We are part of the web of life that makes us one with all humanity, one with all the universe. We know that we're connected to one another. Help us to remember that we are connected to all people and every part of this world that we cherish. Help us to live as people who are worthy of that world. Give us the strength to combat injustice, to speak truth to power, to bring love in place of fear and mistrust. May we be strengthened to care for one another, to care for those beyond these walls, to work for peace and justice for all people everywhere, and to care for this beautiful and fragile earth we all share. Each week we pause to attend to the concerns in our own hearts, for ourselves, for those we care about, and for our wider world. I invite you now to take a moment in silence to reflect on those concerns. And now, if you like, you may speak the names or the concerns aloud in the sanctuary or write them in the chat. Mary Lou, Connie, Bob, Rose, Sue. May all whose names were spoken and all those whose unspoken names we still hold in our hearts find peace and healing this day. This morning's reading is a teaching tale from the Zen Buddhist tradition. There are many versions of this story out there, so you may have heard a slightly different form of it, but the gist will be the same. And it begins as all my favorite stories begin. Once upon a time, as a monk was walking through a forest, he saw a tiger peering out at him from under the underbrush. As the monk turned to run, he heard the tiger spring after him to give chase. Barely ahead of the tiger and running for his life, our hero came to the edge of a steep cliff. Clinging onto a strong vine, the monk climbed down over the cliff edge just as the tiger was about to pounce. Hanging over the side of the cliff, with the hungry tiger pacing above him, the monk looked down and was dismayed to see another tiger stalking the ravine far below. Just then, a tiny mouse darted out from a crack in the cliff face above him and began to gnaw at the vine to which he clung. At that precise moment, the monk noticed a patch of wild strawberries growing from a clump of earth near where he dangled. Reaching out, he plucked one. It was plump and perfectly ripe, warmed by the sunshine. He popped the strawberry into his mouth. It was perfectly delicious. Here endeth the reading. Well, you may understand why that reading was on my mind when I tell you that a beloved member of the Little Mennonite Church, where I am also a member, is dying of lung cancer. She recently went on to hospice care, and folks in the church are having a hard time accepting that there aren't more treatment options for her, that it's time to start thinking about how to let go. She's part of a Soul Matters group that I'm in. Do you folks use Soul Matters here? So you know it's this lovely program for small group spiritual growth and exploration. And we've been doing ours on Zoom. And at our Zoom meeting, one of our last Zoom meetings in the spring, during her time to share, she mentioned that she has been surprised to find that people don't shy away from the topic of death when they talk with her. In fact, she's been surprised to find that people are actually eager to talk about death with her. And then she said something that really kind of woke me up. She said, when you're talking to people about death, it's really important that you bring all your joy to the conversation. Well, as you know, Soul Matters groups aren't a place where you have a whole lot of discussion in the moment. One person at a time shares deeply while everyone else listens deeply. So I didn't get a chance to ask just what she meant by that, and she had to leave the meeting a bit early, so she wasn't there for the give and take that followed. And then for a long time, she was too weak and tired to have visitors. So until I could talk with her again, I had a long time to sit with that comment and think about what she might have been saying. When you're talking to people about death, it's really important that you bring all your joy to the conversation. I got the clear impression that she was finding all those conversations about death a bit challenging. Not because she is afraid of death or in denial about her own death, she clearly is not, but because people approach those conversations so very seriously. They've become afraid to laugh or be silly in her presence. Everything becomes somber. So what I think I heard her saying was, please, if we're going to talk about death, bring me your joy. Be fully alive as we talk about death. What I really think I heard her saying was, please don't act as if I'm already dead. Now, it's hard to bring our joy to conversations about death. And I think that's true when we're being literal, when we're talking with a good friend who is, in fact, dying about the fact that she is, in fact, dying. I think it's also true on a more metaphorical level. Whenever we face those really big, scary, painful things, the state of the world, the divisions in our country, the fragility of our lives. I remember when the war in Ukraine was first unfolding, back in the spring, the horror of what was happening, the devastating photographs of refugee children traveling alone, people fleeing with whatever they could carry with their pets strapped to their bodies, men staying behind to fight, weeping as they said goodbye to their families at the train stations. It was so hard to look at those pictures. And yet I felt as though in all my helplessness, the one thing I could do was to bear witness, to see and to look and to feel. And at the exact same time, you may remember, we were having the most glorious spring. Green was beginning to burst out everywhere. Birdsong was ringing out in the early mornings as I took my walks and as I read these articles full of images of war and suffering. I couldn't help but feel joy at the beauty that was bursting forth all around me. And then I couldn't help but feel guilty to be experiencing joy when so many other people were so deep in despair. And then my sister sent me an article from the New York Times by a writer named Margaret Renkel. She's a Southerner, and she often apparently writes about the natural world and about the South. And she wrote about the tension of experiencing the joy and the beauty of the spring, even as we know that the world itself is in peril, and that we as human beings are largely responsible for that peril. And that so much of the greenery that is lifting her heart is actually the result of invasive species that are doing damage, and that she knows she does not deserve this joy. And yet she writes, I refuse to quell this joy. It's possible to understand what invasive species are doing to the woods and still feel the leaping heart of joy in greenness. It's entirely possible to understand what human beings are doing to the woods and to one another in this moment of dread and grief and terrible struggle, and still exult in birdsong and tiny blooming flowers poking out from under the dead leaves of autumn. In this troubled world, it would be a crime to snuff out any flicker of happiness that somehow leaps into life. And then she goes on to say, we are creatures built for joy. At the very saddest funerals, we can hear a funny story about our lost beloved, and God help us, we laugh. We can stagger out of an appointment where a person in a white coat has given us the news we think we cannot bear to hear. And still we smile at the baby in the checkout line, clapping her chubby hands at the balloons by the cash register, or kicking her feet in joy at a stranger's smile. This is who we are, the very best of who we are. And she closes by saying, turn your face up to the sky. Listen. The world is shivering into possibility. The world is reminding us that this is what the world does best. New life, rebirth, the greenness that rises out of ashes. We are creatures built for joy, she says, even in the midst of sorrow and pain. When I was growing up in our little humanist Unitarian fellowship in York, Pennsylvania, we sang the haunting hymn Every Night and Every Morn, with that beautiful music by Ralph Vaughan Williams and poetry from William Blake. You'll get to hear the hymn sung beautifully today by Kathy and Rebecca during the offertory. be sure to listen for these lines. Joy and woe are woven fine, clothing for the soul divine. Under every grief and pine runs a joy with silken twine. And then it goes on to say, it is right, it should be so. We are made for joy and woe. And when this we rightly know, safely through the world we go. Yes, Margaret Renkel, we are creatures built for joy. And yes, William Blake, we are built for joy and woe. As I thought about all this, I realized that there are two very different kinds of circumstances where I have a lot of trouble living into that reality that joy and woe are woven fine. When it's hard for me to bring my joy to those conversations about death. Sometimes, when I'm in the presence of someone else's pain or suffering, I may be aware of the joy in my own life, as I was this past spring, the joy of the spring, in the midst of the awareness of the suffering in Ukraine. But it can feel inappropriate or even disrespectful somehow to acknowledge that joy. How dare I feel joy when my friend is dying, when refugees are running from the bombs, when people are dying in the floods, when the earth is on fire? How dare I feel joy? But it's also a struggle to bring my joy or even be able to sense any presence of joy when I'm trapped in my own personal pain or fear or sorrow. When we're facing really hard things in our own lives, whether it's our own death, our own safety, our own grief, then it can be very hard to connect with joy. There's a line I love in a children's book called The Knowing Book, where the narrator is reminding the reader to trust their life and live with courage and confidence. And she writes, "There is magic around you, but it hides." Sometimes the magic seems very well hidden, and I lose sight even of the possibility for joy. And yet the claiming of joy, even in the midst of death, whether that's literal death or metaphorical death, is an imperative of the spiritual life. The Buddhist story that I used for our reading this morning makes that point in an unmistakable way. It's a classic Zen teaching tale, and I found an interesting commentary on it by someone named Dr. Munir Kazmir. He's a Pakistani medical doctor and humanitarian. And he points out that this very well-known story is hard for most people. He writes, "Now, most of us don't like this story. Indeed, even devout students of Zen Buddhism struggle with its teaching and its meaning. Most particularly in societies heavily influenced by Hollywood, modern tastes generally run more toward the happy ending. We want the mouse to speak, perhaps offer to save the man in some magical bargain. We want the strawberry to transform the man into a bird who flies away to safety. But most of all, we just can't stand the ending of The Tiger and the Strawberry. The most burning question is left unanswered, dangling. What happens to the man? Except, he says, we already know what happens to the man. He dies." Dr. Kazmir goes on to remind us that the monk's plight in this story is really that of all of us every day. Given how unlikely it was statistically that we would ever evolve into life in the first place, and how perilous life is, we really shouldn't be here at all. As he puts it, considering that we are here, and considering that we won't be around all that long, even if we die of extreme old age, considering these things should instill a profound sense of appreciation for the present moment. There is no staying off that cliff. There is no avoiding those tigers forever. The mouse of inexorable time is chewing away at our lifeline moment by moment. The only choice is whether or not we will notice, eat, and enjoy the strawberry. Because whether we enjoy it or ignore it, we're still getting eaten by that tiger. And then he closes his remarks with a quotation from the Buddhist monk Pema Chodron. Tigers above, tigers below. This is actually the predicament that we are always in terms of our birth and death. Each moment is just what it is. It might be the only moment of our life. It might be the only strawberry we will ever eat. We could get depressed about it, or we could finally appreciate it and delight in the preciousness of every single moment of life. That monk brought all his joy to a conversation about death. And the strawberry was so very sweet. If you know much about Buddhism, you know that they don't shy away from talking about death and the importance of living our life within the clear knowledge of the reality of our coming death. But I said earlier that claiming joy in the midst of suffering is a spiritual imperative. And while Buddhism shows that very clearly, I think it's true in other religions as well. And the other one I want to lift up this morning is Christianity. Because I think this is a key part of the message of Christianity that often gets lost in contemporary understandings of Christian theology. The whole journey from crucifixion to resurrection. A lot of traditional Christian theology puts all of its emphasis on resurrection as a literal event that defeats death, that overcomes death, that vanquishes death. In the Mennonite church on Easter, when I'm a song leader, I actually have to stand up there and sing out, "For Jesus has risen and we shall not die." But of course we will die. Just like that monk, right? We all know we're going to die. The Mennonites all know that too. But to me, the real message is that even in the face of such terrible suffering, joy can still arise. It's not that the crucifixion is canceled out by the resurrection. It's the astonishing miracle that they can coexist. Not a literal resurrection that overcomes death, but a spiritual rising that is not stifled by death, that can't be stopped by death. Now, this isn't a sermon on UU understandings of the resurrection. You can get Larry to ask me back next Easter if you want that. But I believe that Jesus lived out of a deep conviction of what he understood to be right, what he felt God called him to model for others. A realm of love and healing and hope. And that he was so committed to that realm of love and healing and hope that he was willing to die for it. And that even in their deep fear and grief after his death, his disciples still felt the ongoing presence of that love and the joy that it brought them. Sort of a cosmic version of the way that we laugh with joy even through our tears as we remember our loved ones at memorial services. Throughout our lives, we face very real pain, suffering, and fear. This is not a Pollyanna sermon saying, oh, just look on the bright side and count your blessings and everything will be fine. It's a reminder that in the midst of pain and suffering and fear, we are still called to honor and experience joy. To do so is not a betrayal of those who suffer. It's not a denial of the hardship of our own lives. It takes courage to look for joy when things are at their worst. But staying in touch with the joy is what sustains us through the struggle. It's what gives us the energy then to work for all that is still beautiful and good in our own fragile lives and in this beautiful but broken world that we share. Back in the spring, I attended the installation of the Reverend McKinley Sims at the UU congregation in Mount Airy. and my dear colleague Kent Mathias gave the charge to the congregation. And I asked for his permission to quote him because I was so inspired by his words. He charged them, quote, to transform lives as disciples of love, courage, and hope. He gave them 3 specific ways that they should do that. And the first was to keep on loving life. He said, celebrate life like David, who danced before the Lord with all his might. Sing like Mercedes Sosa, gracias a la vida que me ha dado tanto. Thanks to life which has given me so much. Engage with beauty for the sake of beauty. Listen to Mozart and Marsalis. Exalt in the paintings of Botero and Modigliani. Take hikes along the blazing azaleas in the Wissahickon. Loving life will keep your soul battery full. Loving life will help you live out and share the truth of resurrection. You don't have to wait for a heavenly chariot to take you away to some far-off land. By growing, learning, and changing, you can be born into being more fully alive right now. We can be born again and again and again. So I echo my colleague Kent. Keep on loving life. Our challenging, perilous, sometimes terrifying life. Our life is full of conversations about death, whether they're literal or metaphorical. There is always pain and always sorrow. And we're all always dying. But loving life will help us live out and share the truth of resurrection because we can be born again and again and again. I was finally able to visit my dear friend, and we did indeed end up talking about death, but we also relished the beauty of our surroundings and the beauty of our friendship. We affirmed life, and we laughed a lot. We summoned our courage and brought all our joy to the conversation. And so may we all, today and every day.
Thank you, Reverend Libby. As usual, at this point in our service every Sunday, we ask you to make a contribution to support the ongoing life and ministry of our congregation. And this Sunday's no different. But stepping in at the last minute, I really do not have any remarks prepared for you. So I would invite you to reflect on how this church has given you something, improved your life, helped you find community, helped you through a difficult time in your life, brought you joy, and to reach deep in your pockets and be very generous with us so we can continue bringing those gifts to you, other people, future congregants. As usual, we have 4 fantastic ways that you can give. And you only need to pick just one. For those here in the sanctuary, you can always leave your cash or checks in the box at the back of the sanctuary today. You can always mail a check in to our church. The address is on the screen for those of you at home. You can go online to our website to donate. Or you can use the Vanco Mobile Faith Engagement app on your smartphone to make a contribution. Thank you very much for your generosity. Please join me in dedicating this offering to the work of the congregation, which is weaving a tapestry of love and action. We dedicate our lives, and these are offerings. If you have a chalice at home, please join me in extinguishing it now. As Reverend Libby extinguishes our chalice, I give you these words from David Johnson. I have them, don't worry. Maybe they're here. They're beautiful words. No, they're in my stack somewhere here. Oh, lovely. Thank you so much, Kathy. Singer on the High-Swept Hills of Life by David Johnson. Who could do better than to be a singer on the high, wind-swept hills of life, bringing songs to the soul, songs full of loveliness and hope for all people? please join us in singing hymn number 108, My Life Flows On in Endless Song, and Rise in Body or Spirit. The words will be posted on the screen.
Thank you.